Thank you. Thank you. Honourable colleagues, I rise today to speak to Senator Galvez's motion to recognize that climate change is an urgent crisis. As Senator Galvez's motion states, climate change is indeed an urgent crisis that requires immediate and ambitious response from coast to coast to coast by governments, industries, and individuals. As you know, I am a staunch supporter of agriculture. It's what I know best. So as you might surmise, my focus today will be in the way in which climate change has impacted the agricultural community and the industry's role in the fight against climate change. Climate change has had widespread effects in almost every industry. Agriculture often sees these effects first due to the nature of the work and processes involved. For example, farmers know all too well that agriculture is highly dependent on weather. While many modern methods, techniques, and technologies have made today's farms increasingly productive, they still rely on Mother Nature to do her part. At the end of the day, agricultural success depends on getting the right amount of rain and the right amount of heat at the right time of each year. From large-scale farms to the smallest gardens, agriculture and agribusiness depends on climate at every stage in the cycle of production. And as we know, our climate is changing. We have all seen the destruction left in the wake of extreme weather conditions. These incidents, once rare and uncommon occurrences, have become more and more familiar in our changing world. In fact, extreme weather events in 2021 shattered records around the globe. 2021 was a tough year for farmers. Extreme heat, droughts, flooding, and wildfire affected farms across this country. Late last year, we saw the Fraser Valley in British Columbia consumed by water. These floods and subsequent mudslides have led to widespread destruction of life and livelihoods, particularly in BC's rural and agricultural communities. Thousands of farm animals perished and thousands more required critical attention. Just last week, the Agricultural Committee in the other place began studying this matter and the subsequent recovery efforts. Earlier in 2021, we saw hundreds of thousands of animals succumb to the heat dome in Western Canada, and countless farms struggled during the droughts of this past summer. In fact, the other place also held an emergency debate in December where these very concerns were discussed and debated. While farmers are used to planning for uncertainty, climate change is bringing new extremes, seasonal shifts, and increased variability that are likely to push the boundaries of our climate beyond anything they are used to managing. The effects of climate change have been widespread and vast. A Cornell University-led study found that global farming productivity is 21% lower than it could have been without climate change. This is the equivalent of losing about 7 years of farm productivity increases since the 1960s. Ariel Ortiz-Borbia, Associate Professor at Cornell's Charles H. Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management, said, and I quote, "We find that climate change has basically wiped out about 7 years of improvements in agricultural productivity over the past 60 years. It is equivalent to pressing the pause button on productivity growth back to 2013 and experiencing no improvements since then," end quote. This cannot continue to be the trend going forward. Canada is a leader in the agriculture and agri-food sectors. We must work collaboratively to address the effects of climate change to ensure that our farmers, producers, and processors, as well as our grocery stores, can continue putting food on Canadians' plates. It's no surprise that the agricultural industry has an important role in fighting climate change as well. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in 2016, agriculture contributed about 17% of greenhouse gas emissions globally, and that figure does not include an additional 7 to 14% caused by changes to land use. According to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, 10% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are from crop and livestock production, excluding emissions from the use of fossil fuels or fertilizer production. These are significant numbers that we need to work to bring down. However, the onus cannot be placed solely on farmers and the agricultural industry. They work hard, very hard, to provide us with food, and most of them are good stewards of the land. And as stewards of the land, farmers are heavily invested in the fight against climate change and mitigating its impacts. After all, they too eat what they produce. In fact, many farmers have introduced innovative ways to reduce these emissions and have pursued land use practices that help to mitigate climate change. Many have already taken steps over the years to make their land a zero-till operation. This technique increases the retention of organic matter and nutrient cycling, which in turn increases carbon sequestration, or to have and use perennial forage coverage. There is more carbon in soils under perennial forage than annual crops do in part to the former's ability to better transfer carbon to the soil. In fact, the Canadian Federation of Agriculture shared that farmers have kept their emissions steady for 20 years while almost doubling production, resulting in a decrease in greenhouse gas emission intensity by half. There are many opportunities in this sector for the technical innovation that can help to ensure both climate mitigation and economic benefits. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada also recognizes that agriculture helps slow climate change by storing carbon on agricultural lands. Storing or sequestering carbon in soil as organic matter, perennial vegetation, and in trees reduces carbon dioxide amounts in the atmosphere. We have also seen more technological advancements and innovation, including precision agriculture, the use of artificial intelligence and drones that aim to decrease negative environmental impacts while also increasing profitability. We can also explore the possibility of scaling up technologies that we already know about to yield positive environmental outcomes. There are many other innovative methods farmers are employing in order to protect the environment without sacrificing profitability. An example of this is reintegrating livestock and crops on farms, incorporating the use of managed grazing, which can increase livestock's nutrient consumption as well as increase organic matter. Additionally, vertical farming and urban farming have gained popularity in recent years. These innovative ways of farming allow us to grow crops in cities without taking up much space. We also see the use of hydroponics, meaning growing crops directly in nutrient-enriched water rather than soil. The challenge for agriculture and agri-food sector will be to mitigate greenhouse gases while adapting to the impacts of climate change without jeopardizing food security. And to do so, Canadian agriculture producers and food processors will need the government's help and support in transitioning their operations to be more sustainable, and they will also require the government's support while they seek to change decades-long practices and procedures. Many organizations, including the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Dairy Farmers of Canada, and the Canadian Pork Council, among others, have highlighted their dedication to supporting Canada's fight against climate change. There are, of course, specific concerns to each sector regarding such issues as fair carbon pricing and other potential impacts to the overall sustainability of the industry and sector. But ultimately, Canadian agriculture knows that they have a critical role to play as stewards of the land, which involves preserving ecosystems and resources, such as soil and water, as well as minimizing the environmental impacts of their activities through the implementation of beneficial agricultural practices. In December, I attended a meeting hosted by the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, where they screened the Guardian of the Grasslands documentary. I highly encourage everyone to take the time to watch it. This short documentary was created by a group of dedicated conservationists, ranchers, and Canadian filmmakers. The film explores the current state of one of the world's most endangered ecosystems, the Great Plains grasslands, and the role that cattle play in its survival. Unfortunately, 74% of our grasslands are already gone. It is critical to note that the grasslands are home to over 60 Canadian species at risk and is also one of the world's most stable carbon sinks. This is just another example of the environment we need to work to protect. I am proud to highlight the ranchers who are doing their utmost to conserve the natural prairie grasslands by using beef cows to mimic the vital role that bison played in forming these landscapes through grazing over thousands of years. At this time, I would like to quote Christine Tapley of Ducks Unlimited Canada. Quote, "The beef industry relies on the grass landscape as part of its production cycle, and the prairie ecosystem needs the impact of grazing in order to rejuvenate grass and plants. It's a necessary and symbiotic relationship. When ranches disappear, we lose the grass that goes along with it." End quote. Honourable colleagues, we know that climate change is one of the biggest issues facing our world today, and it's clear that the agricultural industry understands and supports the call to action to fight climate change. As stewards of the land, those working the land continue to see firsthand the negative effects of climate change, and they are also among the front lines of mitigation efforts. And as I mentioned earlier, our farmers face the brunt of climate change, in many cases as Canadian agriculture suffers greatly from its effects. The frequency of extreme weather events has doubled since the 1990s. There's been an increase in floods, droughts, forest fires, and storms that unsurprisingly interfere with the planting to harvest, which disproportionately affects farms of all sizes. While we recognize that agriculture is a part of the problem when it comes to climate change, the agricultural sector has demonstrated continuous improvement over many years, while emissions from other sectors have risen over time. So agriculture also has the amazing potential to be an important part of the solution. All that being said, we are asking a lot of our farmers. Many agricultural operations rely on decades-old practices that have only recently been deemed to be environmentally detrimental. Making the switch to new technology costs a lot of money, and while I've never heard a farmer who was in it for the money, it does impact the viability of their businesses and enterprises. I'm taking this opportunity to once again call upon the Canadian government to work collaboratively with our agricultural industry so that they can help make the journey to environmental sustainability a little easier for everyone. They can and will be part of the solution, but we also need to give them the tools necessary to do so. And those tools must be science-based and harmonized across the country and around the world with our trading partners to ensure that they can continue to be viable participants in the fight against climate change. I am confident that the agricultural industry, which has been innovating for as long as it has existed, will continue to rise to the challenge. Of course, initiatives must come from all sectors and be a joint effort from all of us. And in order to achieve our goals in greenhouse gas reductions, governments and industry must work together. The second to last point of Senator Galvez's motion highlights that the failure to address climate change will result in catastrophic consequences, especially for Canadian youth, Indigenous peoples, and future generations. Honourable colleagues, I know that many of us in this chamber have children and grandchildren. Without working together to challenge and change the effects of climate change, I fear that they will be living in a world entirely different than the one we know today. Countless Canadian farmers are working across the country to ensure that our ecosystems, such as the grasslands, are preserved for generations to come. The climate crisis is clear. Let's do our best to support all sectors who are working to save our planet. Thank you. Merci. Megwich.